was born when she kissed me. I died when she left me. I lived a few weeks while she loved me.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is a special video that I've been meaning to do. I think it'd be a really interesting thing to do, to talk about first person perspective, first person narrative, a writing technique that's fairly common, but I think it's interesting to talk about it, specifically how it enhances books and what it does and why it's interesting. So just straight off the bat, I thought it'd be quite nice to mention that the book that I always think got me into reading properly as a teenager, like I was probably, I don't know, 12 or 13 or something when I read it, but made me want to read books as a habit, you know, as a hobby, was Sunny Still Rat by Harry Harrison. And this is done in the first person. And the first line is, "When the office door opened, suddenly I knew the game was up." And you're already getting a sense of why first person narrative is really cool for the perspective within the narrative. So it's not just storytelling, oh, this happened and that happened and this happened, but it's how I felt about how this happened. So straight away, just a very simple, fun, pulpy book that's not particularly complicated, that I have a lot of affection for. Straight away you can see how good the first person narrative aspect of it is in that book. So I thought it'd be nice to talk about that, but I've got a few other books I wanted to talk about. Whoops. In different ways. And I will say, actually, that another one I want to mention, which I couldn't find, I've got my copy somewhere. I've actually got more than my copy and still couldn't find one. But Andy Weir's The Martian. The reason why I think it's a really interesting thing to mention is that it's in first person narrative. It's written brilliantly. And I read it after watching the film. And I think it's remarkable that it had a really effective, it was a really effective read. It really did. It was brilliant. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I was laughing. I was so tense when they were trying to do the final kind of climactic moment, and just so many moments of the book I absolutely loved. But I knew the story, knew exactly what was going to happen because of the film. Because the film pretty much copies the narrative of the book. But the first person narrative was what made it special, and it made it from Mark Watney, I think his name is, Mark Watney's point of view. His entries into the log were sarcastic, were pessimistic, were optimistic, were cynical, were ambitious, were very reflective, off the cuff sometimes. The actual characterization of the writing itself in those logbooks were just awesome. And I think that's an interesting thing to reflect on, that if it was a third person narrative, I don't think the book would have been as good, and it certainly wouldn't have been as effective after seeing the film. So I really loved that read. I thought it was a really enjoyable read, and it's interesting that I'd already seen the film. I already knew exactly what was going to happen. So I think that's a testament to the writing of it. Right, so let's look at some other examples I've got here. This is a really interesting one. We Have Always Lived in the Castle, Shirley Jackson. The Mary, or Mary Cat Blackwood, is extremely memorable as a narrator, and her perspective on her own upbringing, if you like, her sister, her place in the community, her opinions about the community, and her overriding paranoia, and the way that she thinks, the way she perceives she is perceived, is just incredible. It's so well done, and that's probably the best thing about this book. It's a book that doesn't really have that many things happen, but it's the first person narrative that makes it special, and it's how she reacts, it's how Mary Cat reacts to everything that's happening and what she thinks about it all. And it has a very distinct character. She is one of the most distinctive characters I've read for a long time. I absolutely love this book. I think it's one of the best books I've ever read. But her speech, her point of view, her characterization, that is what makes the book special. And it would not be anywhere near as successful as a third person thing. So I think this is a really good example of how first person narrative can change the book, because this book has got an eerie, creepy atmosphere about it. It's like there's this sort of undercurrent unease through the whole thing. And it's Mary Cat's perspective on life. That is what is creating this unease, which I think is just fantastic. It's not that there's a really terrible thing about to happen. It's that Mary Cat feels so out of place. She's so alienated, and that's what makes this so interesting. And actually, the narrative does go into unexpected areas towards the end, and that makes sense because of how Mary Cat's been speaking through the whole book as well. So yeah, it's so good, but because it's first person narrative. I'm going to talk about Sayaka Murata. So Sayaka Murata is quite a unique writer, I think. So I've got this one here. I couldn't find Earthlings, but Earthlings is probably even more a great example of how first person narrative is really essential to make these books work. I honestly think they wouldn't even work if they were third person, because what makes them interesting and a joy to read and fascinating is this thought process in these characters that Sayaka Murata is writing about. So Convenience Store Woman is first person narrative about a woman who really does not want to follow the conventions of what a woman should be, and she's got lots of pressure from her family to find a husband and have kids, and when the decisions she makes from this pressure and what she decides to do is crazy, and it's brilliant. But if it was third person narrative, it would seem odd and kind of not very realistic, and it would seem a bit silly. But it's not silly, it's not far-fetched, because it's spoken through the lens of Sayaka Murata's main character, the convenience store woman. I've forgotten her name. What's her name? I don't know. The thing with first-person narratives stories is that you don't always get their name repeated over and over again. Keiko. That's it, Keiko. Keiko doesn't fit in, and that is the main theme here. But it's a great feminist book about how we have these expectations, or certainly used to have these expectations. Things are changing a bit, but there's still these expectations for women to be certain ways, and her reaction to that is like a typical Sayaka Murata's kind of decision to go down that road. I mean, with Earthlings, it's a slightly more dramatic and controversial, because the character in Earthlings goes through some horrendous trauma, and her perspective on life is very odd, but it's coloured by these experiences she has, traumatic experiences she has. And again, if it was third person narrative, it would seem so odd, but it's so important in Earthlings how those characters, the two main characters actually, see the world and see themselves and see each other actually. So yeah, that's a really, really important point about that. So another really interesting one, another Japanese one, Kanei Minato's Confessions. The reason why this is interesting, why I wanted to mention this, is that this has got 6 parts, and they're different perspectives. They're not all different. Some of them are repeated, but this is a fascinating story that unravels as you read it and gets layered. It's about a young girl that gets murdered. And the first perspective, the first part of the book, is from the mother's perspective, who's a teacher who suspects she knows who murdered her daughter. It's a really interesting book. I found it, I couldn't put it down. and it's very short. It's a very quick read actually, but I think it's very, very memorable. But what's interesting is that each part goes to a different aspect of the story, and a different aspect of the events that happened that resulted in this little girl dying, and it's just brilliant. So it would not work as well. Actually, it might work as well. You could tell the story differently, but I think it's really, really effective the way that Minato chose to tell the story through those different perspectives. So that's awesome. Percival Everett's Erasure, recently reviewed on the channel, and I mentioned it in the monthly wrap up. This is a very recent read for me, but again, this is so much about this character, Monk's perspective on literature, on publishing, and also the relationships with his family work better from his perspective as well. You get his thought process all the time. But I think what's so good is that you've got this disdain and frustration about what he's expected to do as a writer and what he's seeing around him, and this particular book that's getting really popular that he resents. That stuff means so much more. It's communicated so much better. It's articulated so much better through his perspective than I think it would have been through a third person perspective. So I love this book, and it was a brilliant read. But I think a lot of that is the first person point of view coming across. So I wanted to mention that as well. This one is a really interesting one because it's such an odd book. Anna Kavan's Ice. I would recommend you read that, especially if you read kind of more colourful prose and you like sort of literature, sort of more difficult literature. It's a book that is like now seen as a classic science fiction novel. It's got quite a mysterious character to it, and as a book, sorry, not the character itself, but I'll read a bit of it actually because I think it'll make it more meaningful. Set in a frozen world that has gradually been devastated by ever-encroaching ice, Anna Kavan's masterwork follows one man's pursuit of a mysterious silver-haired girl to the ends of the earth and to the ends of everything. And his perspective is almost dreamlike, and he is lost, very clearly lost psychologically. It's a very eerie book, and a lot of that's coming through his own perspective. And it's a really interesting one, open for interpretation as well. I found it a really fascinating book, and I felt a little bit brave because my review of it on the channel suggested an interpretation that I hadn't seen anywhere, but I thought, no, this is knowing a bit about the author. I think that's what this is about. So read the book, check out my review, but it's a really odd, eerie, creepy, atmospheric book, but it's coming from this man's perspective and this man's relentless but also kind of confused pursuit of this woman that he's dreaming about. It's really interesting with this huge cataclysmic stuff happening around him. So yeah, Anna Kavan's Ice. And then I'm just going to finish off with an unreliable narrator. So unreliable narrators are a great technique for first-person narrative books to hook you in, twist the plot, surprise you, shock you maybe, and throw the rug from under you, pull the rug from under you. I don't always like unreliable narrators because sometimes I get so frustrated. But this is very clever. Susanna Clarke's Piranesi is very clever. And you can tell a few chapters in that Piranesi does not really understand what's happening around him. There's a few clues early on that what he's saying can't be true. And really, the whole nature of this book is unraveling this mystery. And towards the end of the book, you start getting some answers. And it's really interesting that on the one hand, he's unreliable, and you know that he's effectively lying, but also there's an innocence about his character. that he can only be in that position because he's effectively a victim as well. So I'm not going to tell you anything more about that, because obviously the unreliable narrator aspect of it means that there'll be huge spoilers if I said too much. But that is a really effective example of an unreliable narrator, and the fact that you don't know exactly what he's describing because you know it's not quite true. And when it gets revealed, then you start rethinking what you've been reading. So yeah, this is a really good example of that. And yes, some people absolutely love the unreliable narrator technique. So if you love that, definitely recommend Piranesi. So yeah, I think first person narratives are fascinating. They are. I'm becoming more and more a fan. I'll keep reading books with this great technique that allows you to get this perspective through the storytelling. But there are certain things you can't do. You know, clearly they are in the action all the time, and also they can't die. But those limitations, I think, are far outweighed by the brilliance that you can create with some of these examples here, where these books have done such a great job of putting over this point of view. Let me know below what your favourite first-person perspective books are. I'd love to know. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Stay curious.